publisher of the Antelope Valley Press. He has worked in news, media, television, and broadcasting for many years.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming to this debate tonight. Your interest in the process and participation in this forum shows your commitment to our electoral system. Please honor that commitment by remaining quiet during the forum. No video, no audio recordings, no streaming are allowed in this event. If I perceive that that is going on, I'll stop the proceedings until somebody turns a device off. Please hold your applause until the forum is over, and please refrain from any interruptions or protests. We understand that people are passionate about this race on both sides, but please don't allow an outburst to reflect badly on your candidate of choice or to keep people from hearing your candidate's response. This forum will be approximately 60 minutes in length. We have 4 different sections. The first section will be 2-minute opening remarks from both candidates. The second section will be a series of general questions. The person asked the question will respond with a 90-second answer, and then there will be a 60-second rebuttal. We will alternate questions between the candidates for fairness. The third section will be a series of rapid-fire questions where the candidates will have 30 seconds to respond to each question. At the end of the fourth section will be 2-minute closing remarks from the candidates. Time limits will be denoted with a series of flags, and our timer tonight is Larry Colton. We have a real low-tech system. Green card means you have 1 minute left. Yellow cards are shown at 30 and 15 seconds, and the red card is shown at the end. It's just like driving. I would ask the candidates to please remain civil and constructive during the forum and avoid any disparaging remarks about your opponent. Candidate order was determined by a coin toss before the forum began, and tonight, Steve Knight will begin the proceedings. Congressman Knight.
Thank you all for being here. I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the Palmdale Chamber of Commerce for bringing us to Larry Cimboli's house. We cherish this. Lily and I have a great relationship with Larry Cimboli throughout his whole life, and it's always great to be in the Cimboli Center. You know, I think what I talk about is what we have done while we've been in Congress. What are the accomplishments? How have I talked to the community? What kind of wins have we done for the community? And what we can bring back to the community. And that's what I think this election is going to be about. We said when we went into Congress that I would be the aerospace voice. I would talk about how we can bring aerospace to the forefront. We would talk about our veteran care, and we would talk about small business. That's exactly what we've done. So I went on armed services. That was my first request. I went right to the leadership and I said, I want to be on armed services because this is Aerospace Central. I want to work directly with our military. I want to work with the generals and the rank and file to see what we can do to accomplish missions for the military. Then I want to work with veterans. We brought forward a groundbreaking, new, innovative process right here in the Antelope Valley for our veteran care. And in small business, now I am a chairman of a subcommittee that I work directly with a Democrat from Florida, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, to work on small business so that we can make it better for everyone. So I think 30. I think what I've done is exactly what I told you I was going to do. We would work with everyone. We would work to make sure that we were working in a bipartisan manner. And we tried to bring as many wins back to the district as I possibly could. If you see the record, you can see a record of accomplishment. I thank you all for coming here today, and I hope this is a spirited debate, and I thank Katie for being here.
Candidate Hill.
First of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the Chamber, and I, as always, want to thank Congressman Knight for having these debates. I want to start off with a question to you all. How many of you feel like Washington is working? perfect. There were just a handful. How many of you don't? That's why we need change. We all know Washington is broken, and for far too long we have had big special interest groups, corporations, Washington insiders, and a broken system of political parties, neither of which has been committed to the people that they're supposed to serve. It's time for a change because we have too many issues that are facing our community. Here in the Antelope Valley, 1 in 5 people are living below the federal poverty line. We have some of the highest usage of the Medi-Cal programs. We have some of the lowest, we have an unemployment rate that is twice that of the national average, and we were the community that was most affected in the entire country by the subprime mortgage crisis, and we've still yet to recover. So that there are more people who are underwater on their mortgages still in the Antelope Valley than anywhere else in LA County, according to the county assessor's office. These are real problems facing our community, facing our generation, facing people across the country, and we have to make some serious changes for us to be able to address those on a large scale. I'm from this community. I grew up in the Antelope Valley. I moved to Santa Clarita when I was 11. My dad is a police officer. My mom is a nurse. And I've spent my career working on some of the toughest issues facing our society, working on the issue of homelessness and affordable housing. And I'm going to take those skills to Washington to finally start addressing the issues that we care about and be a voice for real people. Thank you.
Before we proceed, I want to remind everybody, please hold your applause until the end. We're now going to enter the second section. My first question is for Congressman Knight. Congressman Knight, many have said that our borders must be secure before we can begin a broad overhaul of immigration laws. How do you do that?
Well, I think immigration and healthcare are probably the two issues that affect everyone in our community, and they're probably the most difficult discussions that we can have. We've talked about different ways that we can talk about, we can fix immigration, and we can kind of move down a path of immigration. The very first thing that's got to be attached to immigration is a stronger border. Everyone knows that, and everyone agrees on that. If you saw the television meeting with President Trump and Leader McCarthy and Leader Hoyer from the Democrat Party, they all agreed on that. How do we do it? We can bring in new technology that we've used in Afghanistan and Iraq. We can build a wall in certain areas, and we can have new technologies in other areas. But the amount of drugs that come over the border, the amount of crime, the amount of sex trafficking and indentured servantry, and the possible threat of terrorism that can go over the border, we know that the border has to be secure. I've been to the border in about 4 or 5 different areas. There are certain places in the border where you can just step over a 1.5-foot wall and walk right into the country. So if we're going to have a secure border and have a talk on immigration, then let's attach that to anything we talk about, whether it be DACA, TPS, or any other group, and I think you get a lot of bipartisan discussion that is healthy.
Thank you. Candidate Hill.
Sure, I agree that border security is absolutely crucial for the same reasons: sex trafficking, drug trafficking, possible terrorist threats. But what we're doing right now is spending our resources in the wrong places. We're spending it on separating families. We're spending it on sending people back home, or back to what is not ever and has not ever been their homes since they were little kids. And we're sending them to, we're sending people who are in desperation, who have been living here and working here for, in some cases, decades, when they haven't committed any crimes, because of a system that is broken. We have to have real immigration reform, and Congressman Knight's party has been unable to deliver on that for far too long, even though it's a promise that's been made over and over again. This is about our commitment to our neighbors, and there's no reason that we can't have smart, tough immigration law that is actually about helping people at the same time.
Next question for Candidate Hill. How can Congress help to curb gun violence?
Sure. So first, we need to recognize that there has been for far too long an over-influence of the gun lobby and of groups like the NRA. I know that just recently Congressman Knight said that he'll no longer be taking NRA money, so I hope that means that he'll start supporting legislation that is about gun sense. That doesn't mean I'm not for the Second Amendment. I fully support the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner myself, and I grew up with guns. So did my husband. But we need to be for universal background checks. We need to be for closing the loopholes that make it possible for someone who's in a serious mental health crisis to get a weapon. We need to extend waiting periods, and we need to make for uniformity across all state lines. And what we especially don't need to do is make it possible for people to buy a weapon with easy restrictions in one state and get a concealed carry license and then bring it across our state lines. And that's something that Congressman Knight has voted for over and over again. So I hope with your renewed commitment to not take NRA money, we'll see those kinds of changes happen as well.
Congressman Knight.
So gun violence is one of those issues that does hit home for me. I was a police officer for 18 years. I actually was a police officer for 18 years, and I was on the street, and I saw many shootings, and I was in many situations that were very dangerous because of guns. What this Congress has done and what I have voted for is a very comprehensive mental health package, because we know that people that go into schools or they go into places and they're going to shoot people most likely have a mental health issue. So we have a very comprehensive package that I have voted for. It's a mental health package that has moved its way through Congress, and I think that's one of the very first things. The second thing is to be a responsible gun owner. That means you lock up your guns. That means you're responsible with your own guns. That means you don't go on Facebook and put a picture of your guns on a kitchen table and have a discussion about them. That's not what responsible gun ownership is about. So if we're going to have a real discussion about guns and how we get to stopping gun violence, the very first thing is going to be mental health. That's the way this Congress is moving. And the very next thing is have a real discussion about responsible gun ownership.
Next question for Congressman Knight. What would you do to ensure that all citizens have the ability to vote without unnecessary obstacles?
So citizens in this country, that's part of your civic duty is to go out and vote, right? And that's your voice. That's who you're going to see who's going to be on your city council. That's who you're going to see is going to be president or Congress. I take it very seriously. Since I was 18 years old, I have voted. I have voted in all elections. I don't just vote in the presidential election, I vote. So I think that the civic duty is there. How do we make sure that everyone can get to make sure that their voice is heard? So what we've done in California when I was in the legislature is make sure that when people show up, they get to vote. I think an ID was the proper way to make sure that people who are there and they're saying, I am Joe Schmo, then you can identify them. That wasn't accepted in Sacramento. So the next thing is let's make sure if you can't get to a voting poll, you can be like me, you can be a permanent absentee voter. They send it right to my house. I sit there, I get all my information, I fill it in, I put a stamp on it, and I mail it off. Now we have made it very easy for people to vote, but there still are some obstacles to make sure that there's not one person out there that can vote, isn't voting. So this year, the party that's in charge in Sacramento has made it so you can pick up people's ballots. You don't have to sign under perjury of law, so now we can go out and pick up people's ballots. So I think we've moved in a direction of we want everyone to vote that can vote, and we're making it as easy as possible to do this.
Candidate Hill.
Yeah, I think it's great to hear that Congressman Knight is for voting, but I think that it's clear that his party over and over again wants to suppress voters. And here's what we know. We know that the people who are the least likely to vote, people of color, people who are of lower income levels, younger people, are the ones who are most likely to vote Democratic. And that is something that we have to take ownership of and start to address, and we are. We're organizing around it, and this election, I think, can make a huge difference in that regard. But things like voter ID laws far, far disproportionately affect people who are disadvantaged in some way. They make it almost impossible. We've undermined the Voting Rights Act in so many ways since the Republicans have been in charge, and we have to ensure that those protections are in place. Voting is a fundamental right, and we need to protect it as such, and we need to do everything that we can to ensure that people are getting out to vote. I am surprised to hear that Congressman Knight is also in favor of the new laws that California and the party in charge in Sacramento has passed, because they're Democrats, and I don't think the entire time that he was in Sacramento did he vote with the Democrats on a Voting Rights Act, or a voting rights legislation.
Next question for Candidate Hill. Do you believe Roe versus Wade is settled law?
So I know many of you know this already, but I experienced an unplanned pregnancy myself when I was 18 years old. I had, I was on birth control, and I was in a committed relationship with the person who's now my husband. And it was a huge shocker to me. And because of that experience going through it, I was faced with an incredibly difficult decision. And I ultimately decided that I wasn't going to have an abortion. But I also knew that that was such a difficult decision that no one could possibly make it with the government. The government could not possibly get involved in that decision. It's one that the woman herself has to make with her family, with the people that she trusts and cares about, with her doctor. I had a miscarriage before it came time to really, I ended up not having to deal with the consequences and the challenges that face a young mom who hadn't graduated college yet, but I know that I'm lucky in that regard. And yes, I believe that Roe v. Wade is settled law. And unfortunately, Congressman Knight has voted over and over again to limit a woman's right to choose, even in the severe cases of rape or incest, and at the same time has made it so that employers can block a woman's ability to get birth control, and so that health insurance companies don't need to cover maternity care.
Congressman Knight?
Roe v. Wade is settled law. It is 44 or 45 years old now, and remember what Roe v. Wade said, that states will be able to do what they want in a session of how Roe v. Wade is settled through the Supreme Court. It is settled law. There is no doubt about that. But let's look at what happened in this Congress in this past session. We did one bill, and it talked about abortions. And it said no abortions after 20 weeks. That was the bill that went into Congress. That bill was stopped in Congress, but that was the one bill that we talked about when it comes to an abortion. You can have an abortion, that is settled law, but no abortion after 20 weeks. So that was the only issue that came up. That was the issue that we voted on in the House. It died in the Senate, but Roe v. Wade, yes, it absolutely is settled law.
Next question for Congressman Knight. What would you do to support the current version of the ACA, including the protection for pre-existing conditions?
So between the ACA and the HCA, there are issues in both of them. We see that the ACA has some issues. We see that the AHCA has some issues. I've talked with many members in Congress on both sides of the aisle to try and get together to try and figure out a way that we can work on healthcare. Just today, I met with healthcare professionals, and we talked about new ways. What have we done? We put a veteran program right here to help in healthcare for our veteran population so that they can get healthcare right here instead of driving over the hill to Sunset or to West LA. So we're trying to affect our area right here. And lastly, what I will say is if we go to a program that my opponent wants to do, and we do Medicare for all, even the Democrats here in California have said it'll cost $400 billion. For the country, $3.2 trillion. California Democrats have already said we would have to raise your taxes 200%. That's not what the federal level will have to do, because we will have to do something for that. So I'm trying to work with both sides of the aisle. I don't call them Democrats and they're bad. I don't call them Republicans and they're bad. We're trying to work together to figure this out. But this is a very intricate system, and you're going to do it in steps. ACA was not the step. AHCA might not have been the step. But we've got to work this thing together so we can get health care for everyone.
Candidate Hill?
Yeah, I completely agree that we have to do it in steps, and ultimately we need to get to a place that includes healthcare for everyone. This is an especially important thing for me. I've been on the end of it when you don't have healthcare. My husband, Kenny, who's here tonight, had a spontaneous pneumothorax, which is a spontaneous lung collapse, shortly before we got married, and during a brief period before the ACA took effect, that when he didn't have health insurance. And he ended up going to the hospital for 11 days, having to have emergency surgery, and we ended up $200,000 in medical debt. So this is a real challenge. Medical debt is one of the #1 causes of bankruptcy. And if you look at costs, actual cost savings that happen when we fully insure people in our country, it is far, far more than $3.2 trillion. However, what we have to recognize too is that these are incremental changes that need to happen, but what we shouldn't do is attempt to repeal what's already in place without a plan to replace it. And that's exactly what Congressman Knight did multiple times, dozens of times over the course of the time he's been in Congress, and especially this past time, which would have taken away healthcare from over 60,000 people right here in our own community. It would have gutted the guarantee of the Medicaid expansion that was so crucial here, and it would not have had protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And this administration right now is attempting to undermine the pre-existing conditions element of it. Getting rid of the mandate has made it so that the health insurance companies cannot sustain covering everybody. So there has been so many attempts to make it impossible for this healthcare system to work, and we need to have people who are committed to going in there to fix it and not undermine it.
Next question for Katie. What can be done to bring back a spirit of bipartisan cooperation in Washington?
Sure. So I grew up, I'm pretty much the definition of bipartisan in my household. My dad is a lifelong Republican. The first time he ever voted for a Democrat was in the primary when he voted for me. And my mom was a Democrat. She's here tonight. So I think that what we have here in our community, which is one of the most equally partisan communities in the entire country. We're almost exactly Democrat and Republican, with a huge number of people who don't consider themselves affiliated with either party and who would vote either way depending on the person and depending on the issues that they feel are important. We need to have somebody who's going to go in and say that they'll work with either side. I recognize that if I am elected, Kevin McCarthy is going to be my neighbor, and there are many issues and initiatives that I'll have to work with him on. But I also recognize that the vast majority of the representatives from California, the ones who are working on the issues that affect us as a state, like affordable housing, and healthcare, they're Democrats. And so we have to find a way of working between the two. And I think that people like me and like others like me who are running across the country are the ones that can start to lead that change and to say that we're not about representing a party. We're not accountable to just one party. And unfortunately, Congressman Knight has voted with his party and with Donald Trump 98.9% of the time. So he likes to talk about being bipartisan, but unfortunately his votes don't track with that.
Congressman Knight?
So let's talk about votes, and let's talk about how we track. During these two debates, I've heard a lot of things about Republicans are bad, Republicans have done this. Remember, Republicans are almost 40% of who we
I'm not talking about Republicans, I'm talking about Republicans.
Please don't interrupt.
Okay. So remember, in answers, if you say Republicans are bad, that's 40% of the people that you are going to be in charge of if you are elected. We talk about everyone. If you want to be a leader of everyone, then you don't say Republican or Democrat, you say, how do we move forward? So that's what we've done. About 80% of our bills are co-authored by Republicans and Democrats. That's because we're in charge of Congress right now. We have the majority. Why would I need that? Because we need to go in and make sure that people understand what we're trying to do. It's not a Republican idea, it's not a Democrat idea, it's going to help people. I think you might want to co-author it, and that's why 80% of my bills have been co-authored. This thing that keeps coming up about this 98% of voting with President Trump, let's look at the Lugar Institute. The Lugar Institute is a very low bipartisan institute that looks at the 435 people in the House and says, who's the most bipartisan? I am 69 on that list. That means I am in the top percentage of most bipartisan. That means we reach out to Democrats, we reach out to Republicans. When I write a letter like we just did with Congressman Panetta from up north, it was a Republican and a Democrat moving together. So it's not a, they're bad, it's a, let's move together and let's get something done.
Next question for Congressman Knight. You mentioned earlier, aerospace has always been the backbone of the Antelope Valley economy. What would you do to ensure the protection of this important industry?
There is no doubt that that is the biggest economic engine in the Antelope Valley. And I always say this, the Wright brothers on December 17, 1903 did something great. After that, we took over. And that's what's happening right here in the Antelope Valley, Aerospace Valley. We look out for not just the big guys, but the little guys, and we talk to everyone to find out what kind of an amendment can we put into the National Defense Authorization Act to make sure that we're moving forward with products that are going to help our warfighters. Right now, we have the National Defense Authorization Act that is moving forward in the appropriations process. Next week, hopefully it will get done, we'll get it through, we'll get it signed by the President. I have 9 amendments in there. All 9 were accepted by Democrats and Republicans. I even had an amendment in there that was not accepted by the chairman of my party and the ranking member of the Democrats, and we still got it through. So we've been very, very successful, including getting a brand new tower for Plant 42, because Plant 42's tower is seismic and wind problematic. How you can have that in the Antelope Valley, I don't know. So we put something in there, and they're building a new tower at Plant 42.
Candidate Hill?
Excuse me. I come from a long line of people who worked in aerospace. My dad was in the Air Force. My grandfather was someone who worked in aerospace, worked on the space shuttle in the Apollo series. My stepdad, who's here tonight, worked on the B-2 bombers, also in the Air Force. And I'm fully committed to ensuring that this economy that has been fully rejuvenated here in this community, it continues to be so. I think that we recognize the importance of the thousands of jobs that have been created. And to be honest with you, I think that this is something that I would not try to undercut Congressman Knight on at all, and I appreciate what he's done for our community here.
Candidate Hill, next question. What do you think needs to be done to take better care of our veterans?
Sure. So, first of all, veterans are hugely disproportionately affected by the issue of homelessness. And as the executive director of PATH, while I was there, we helped thousands of veterans move off the streets into permanent homes, including a huge number of veterans out here in the Antelope Valley. Veterans are coming back with PTSD, with disproportionate rates of mental health challenges, of substance abuse disorders, of an inability to find jobs that are truly sufficient to meet the living wage requirements. And we have to invest in them. And that isn't something that can just happen through Veterans Administration policies and programs, because we have a number of veterans who have been discharged, dishonorably discharged, or otherwise discharged because of mental health and because of addiction. And those are some of the top issues that are caused by veteran service. I come from a family where every generation of my family has served in the military going back to the Revolutionary War. I've dedicated my career towards it, and I plan on being a voice for veterans when I serve in Congress.
Next question for Congressman Knight. If the White House fires Robert Mueller, what should Congress do?
Do we get an answer to that question?
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Don't take any time.
Now you know the next question. I'll think of another one. I'm sorry, Congressman Knight.
So I have 3 stepbrothers who are in the military. I have a brother, I have a father, I have a lot of relatives that have been in the military. I was in the military. I am a veteran. We work with veterans very closely. One of the things that I think is the most important to our community is working directly with our veterans. I have 2 of the best caseworkers that are in Congress that work directly with veterans. We work on hundreds of cases every month directly for our veterans. But let's look at a couple issues. One of those amendments that I talked about was for opioid addiction for people who are in the military or getting out of the military that have this addiction that we know is a scourge across this country. There is an amendment from me to put more money into making sure that our veterans and our military are not getting hooked on opioids, and if they do, they get to the right service. The groundbreaking VA urgent care initiative that I started right here. It's only in the 23rd and the 25th district, right here in Southern California, nowhere else in the country where veterans can get care right here instead of having to drive over the hill. The last thing, we need a booming economy. The greatest thing Ronald Reagan said about welfare is you want to help them, get them a job. A booming economy does that. We have that right now. 4.2% growth, 3.9% unemployment. The last state statistic we saw on Friday was the highest wage increase since 2008. That is a great thing for a veteran community.
Okay, Congressman Knight, you get to keep talking.
Okay.
I'll restate the question again. If the White House fires Robert Mueller, what should Congress do?
Now, I've been very, very clear on the Mueller investigation. I think the Mueller investigation should continue. We've been very clear that I support that. I also support a timely investigation. So let's make sure that we're not trying to do a political stunt here by pushing something out too far and not getting to the investigative deal that you're supposed to be doing. But we've supported the Mueller investigation from the beginning. We've also talked to other congressional members and said, we should support this. This is how this investigative process moves forward. And let's let's support a timely investigation by the Mueller team.
Candidate Hill?
We absolutely have to support the Mueller investigation. And frankly, if the president fires Mueller, then we have to have a Congress that's gonna hold him accountable. And right now, we can't count on that. With the Congress that's currently there, we simply cannot count on that. And that's the fact, and it doesn't really matter how Congressman Knight's going to vote on that if we don't have others in Congress who are going to. We have to have a Democratic majority. We've made it clear, the people who are in Washington right now have made it clear that they are far too partisan to do their duty when it comes to the safety and integrity of our government.
Next question for Candidate Hill. Some people feel the upcoming midterm elections are a referendum on President Trump. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, I don't think that the upcoming elections are a referendum on Donald Trump. I think that they are a referendum on a broken system. I think Donald Trump is a symptom, not the cause of a broken system. And that why people elected him in the first place across the country was out of frustration for Washington that's not working for us. I think that, as we're canvassing, as we're talking to people, the issues that we hear about the most are healthcare, including mental health and substance abuse services for everyone. We hear all the time about the increased costs, the cost of prescription drugs. We hear about the cost of housing, of the inability to count on our infrastructure, of the unavailability of jobs. I mean, I keep hearing from Congressman Knight about this booming economy, but when we talk to actual voters here in this community, they're not feeling the effects of it. The stock market is not the same as the economy. So we have to address that. We have to be sure that we are actually supporting middle and working class families and having policies that support that. And so, I think that this is what people are voting on. They're not voting on a referendum on Trump, although every single day that goes by, I think we recognize how problematic this administration is on a number of different fronts. But truth be told, if I'm elected and if Donald Trump is still in office, then I'm gonna do everything I can to work with him to get things done for this community if that's what it takes.
Congressman Knight?
No, I don't believe that it's a referendum on the president. I think that it's going to be individuals in their different congressional districts who are going to have to either show a case or they're going to have to be run over by somebody that will come in and show a better case. I honestly believe that. I think that that always happens. We are in a midterm of a new presidency, and we start to see a lot of people talking about things that they might not have talked about in other times because we have a new president and people are looking differently. But this isn't a referendum. What this is going to be is individual candidates and individual congressional members having to go in and show their case. What have you done for your community? Have you got wins for us? Have you worked with both parties on issues that affect us? I think if you look at me, I have bills signed by President Obama, I have bills signed by President Trump. Over 80% of my bills are co-authored by both parties. So I think you're looking at a candidate that works on both sides of the aisle to try and benefit this district and this community.
Congressman Knight, what can be done to reduce the number of homeless people in our community?
So we all know that the homeless population here in the Antelope Valley especially has exploded over the last 10 years. You can drive down certain streets in the Antelope Valley and you can see a much bigger population of homeless than we have seen, like I said, over the last 5 or 10 years. This is a very harsh environment. We go to about 115 degrees, we go down to about 10 degrees. It's very difficult for somebody who doesn't have shelter to be able to survive in this. We know that. So the cities of Lancaster and the city of Palmdale have done kind of their own issues on how they would address homelessness. The best way that Congress can affect this is making sure that we get money down to the local level so that the local level, whether it be the counties or the cities, can help the homeless population. CDBG funds are maybe the best mechanism for that. We had a cut in CDBG funds. I put an amendment in to put $100 million into CDBG funds to bring that level back up to where it was the year before. My amendment was successful, my amendment continued through, and that's the CDBG funds that will directly affect this community.
Candidate Hill.
Sure, so of course homelessness is my background. I spent a decade working on the issue. And my legislative experience comes from passing Prop HHH and Measure H, which have brought critical resources to our communities to address homelessness on a scale we've never seen before. including for the first time a drop in homelessness in LA County in years. Homelessness is related more than anything else to the housing stock issue. We have a 1 million unit shortage in California and a huge number here in our communities, and the housing inaffordability is getting higher and higher every single year. We have a tax plan that just gutted the most important funder of affordable housing. That's the low-income housing tax credit program. It was spending millions of dollars to really leverage state and local investments to make it possible for us to address this crisis and to invest in these units. That's gone now, that's been wiped out, and we have no plan to reinvest in that capacity at the federal level. And that's because instead of investing in our communities, we're putting money into the 80% of the tax benefits go to the wealthiest people in this country and to big corporations and to foreign investors, not to the issues here. So $100 million in CDBG funding is a drop in the bucket compared to the tax breaks that were given to big corporations, and especially to, the one that I can't wrap my head around is foreign investors. These are not people here in our communities that need the help. And so if we want to address the issue, we have to address a number of things, whether it's healthcare, substance abuse, and mental health. There's no one-sided issue to it, but it's poverty and income inequality. And when you're talking about—
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is your stance on the extension of DACA? I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes, DACA needs to be extended. There's no doubt about that. I think that we have over 3,000 people who are DACA recipients here in our community in this district. And we can't just extend it, but we need to provide a true path to citizenship for people who have been living here for most of their lives. And I think that should be part of broader immigration reform.
Congressman Knight?
Well, I would disagree. I don't think we need to extend DACA. I think we need to fix DACA. We've been talking about this for years. We've been talking about the DACA population. We've been talking about the TPS population. It keeps going back and forth as a political football. We shouldn't do that. I've been very clear on what I believe in the DACA population, that the DACA population should be able to stay here in the United States. They should be able to stay here on a process where they're here legally, and then they can move toward citizenship. But remember, when people use this term of path to citizenship, that is a political term. That is not a real term. The people that come over here and they want to immigrate to the United States, there is a way that they immigrate. So when we say path to citizenship, people start thinking, well, are you going to put them in front of me, or are you going to do something that makes them in front of the line? Remember, to become a citizen in the United States, you have to be here legally for 5 years. You get your worksheet after 5 years. Then you can apply. You go down the worksheet. If you check yes on all those worksheet issues, you then can go in for citizenship. There is no path to citizenship. That is how it works. When you start talking else, then you start putting other groups in different situations. So let's have the DACA population stay here. Let's make them legal. If they're here for 5 years, they can work toward their worksheet, and they can go on that process. Same with the TPS.
Next question for Congressman Knight. As a member of Congress, what can you do to support small businesses in your district?
So I am the chairman of contracting and workforce development in small business. I went to Chairman Shabbat when he was the chairman of small business, and I said, well, I'd really like to be on your committee. And he says, you know, you only get on my committee if I asked you to be on your committee. So he came to me the next day and said, would you like to be on my committee? I said, yes, I would. So we have made that a priority, that small business, about 97% of the workers here in America work in a small business. Now, I don't identify the federal level of small business of under 500 people. I say a small business probably in the 50 range, where you're going down to a store and you're seeing employees there, and it's almost a mom and pop type shop. That's about 70% of the employees here in America are under 50 employees. So we have several bills, including this last bill that was just signed by President Trump, to bring more money into loans for small businesses so that they can expand and they can create more opportunities for kids like mine and yours to be hired in a small business atmosphere. The other thing that we have done, we have reached out to small business and said, how can we help you? So we've created a couple bills that give them more opportunities, that give them the ability to reach back out to us in Congress through our work source and through our committees, and say, when there is a problem, we want to deal with it right there. So we have written about 5 bills on small business that has come right from the small business community. Done it.
Next question for candidate Hill.
Oh, I responded to that, right?
I'm sorry, I don't know why I didn't do that. Go ahead.
Sure, so my sister's a small business owner. In fact, she's having her grand opening after being open for about a month for her shop in the next couple days. She's on Sunday. So I understand the issues that small business owners face. And after our last debate, I talked more to small business owners to say, what are the #1 issues that you're facing? And access to capital is certainly an issue, but the ones that I heard the most were healthcare and the fact that they don't feel like they can afford healthcare. My sister is in a huge bind right now because she makes too much money to qualify for subsidies or to qualify for Medicaid or Medi-Cal, but she certainly can't afford the hundreds of dollars a month and the thousands and thousands of dollars in a deductible to be able to be successful. And so much of her money is going into that as opposed to going into her business and investing it where it matters to her. The other thing is taxes. The tax plan, there was so much hope that the tax plan would actually benefit small business owners, but instead, it has given the vast majority of the benefits to large corporations and a very, very small amount to small business owners, because most small business owners are not ones that are filing in the same way that these large corporations are. So if you look at the kinds of businesses that are getting the benefits, the most benefits go to businesses that are making between $250,000 and $500,000 in revenues or higher. So that's just simply not helping people in our communities. And I think that we have to address this holistically. No issue can just be dealt with in a single way.
Okay, now the next question for candidate Hill. What are your thoughts on sanctuary cities? Do you support the withholding of federal funds to those cities that do not cooperate with the federal government on immigration enforcement?
So, first of all, I want to say that this term of sanctuary cities is a political term that has been used to polarize us and to create countless problems. And I don't think that the term itself is reflective of how people feel. Coming from a law enforcement family, of course we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep violent criminals out of our communities and to make sure that they move on once we've identified them. But what we don't want are families, people who have come here for refuge, who, although Congressman Knight talked about the process, the legal process of coming here, it's 100 years for someone to come from Mexico or from many cities, from many countries throughout the globe. And people are coming from violent situations. So that's not something that is valid that we can say, oh, come here legally and then apply for the process. But I think that the bigger issue is that we have a president and so many people in Congress who ran on a dog whistle of blaming immigrants for the problems that we're facing as a country. And so that fear is what led to this label of sanctuary cities, and it's not productive, and instead we need to be talking about real immigration reform, and that's gonna allow us to address the problem.
Congressman Knight?
Well, I'm so glad it doesn't take 100 years because I'm married to my wife who immigrated here from Chile, and we've been married for about 29 years. I went through the process with Lily, and it was a very difficult process. She was here legally, and we went through the whole process of making sure that we went down to immigration and did the paperwork, and then she went through her citizenship, and it was an ordeal. It really was. And we had to spend the night on the immigration steps 2 nights in a row because she had to be one of the first 50 legal people to go through the doors. Now, I can't imagine what it is for somebody who doesn't have status in here and what they have to go through. But we have talked with them, and we've talked with groups of them, and that's why we have the opinion that we do on DACA, on TPS. But I can tell you a quick story. We had the Governor Brown, come over to our lunch about a 1.5 years ago, and we said, please don't sign this bill. Because when you sign this bill, you've got 49 other states that are not doing this. So when they go into appropriations or they go into something else, they're looking at us and saying, you're doing something that is not following the law. And so I said, don't put us in that situation. You already have cities in California that are doing this, from every major city, from San Jose to San Francisco to LA to San Diego, are all doing it. So don't do this. So I think that he overstepped by doing that, and California was already in a kind of quasi-policy of doing what they wanted without showing the federal government.
Next question for Congressman Knight, do you think the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh can continue without hearing testimony from his accuser?
No, I've supported the Judiciary Committee. They are the investigating committee. We have a process here in the United States of how we confirm our justices for the Supreme Court. This is an interesting issue that we're going through, and this is something that we have to take very seriously. I think that Senator Grassley has asked that Dr. Ford come in and testify. They're talking about that back and forth. She said she couldn't be there on Monday, so I think that they're going to talk about what day she can come in. And I also believe that Senator Grassley and the entire judiciary have told her we can do this in an open process, we can do this in a closed process, but we want to understand what the testimony is here. So, but remember, this is through the United States Senate. This is the way that we confirm justices. And the judiciary has the ability to kind of go in and be a quasi-law enforcement committee. They have subpoena powers, they can do the things, they can go through the investigation. So I think it's working through the process.
Candidate Hill?
So first of all, I want to talk as someone who has been a victim of sexual violence, and I know firsthand how difficult it is for a woman to come forward. I think there are several problems with how this is being handled right now. The first of which is that she was asked to come and sit right next to Kavanaugh and to handle the interrogation that's going to be coming at her from people who are accusing her of lying or for making this up for political purposes. And that's such an incredibly difficult thing for a woman, which is why so many women never come forward, or why it takes decades in many cases. So I think, you know, to say that, oh, we just need to go through the judicial process is incredibly problematic, and we have to find a better way of doing it that includes protecting the victim. And I think we need to be asking some really serious questions about who this person is, Kavanaugh, and I frankly think there are many problems with his confirmation, not the least of which is this.
That concludes this portion of the questioning. We will now go into a rapid fire round. Each candidate will be asked a question. We'll have 30 seconds to respond, and we will start with Congressman Knight. What can be done to protect Social Security and Medicare?
Well, many things. I've been a staunch supporter of Social Security and Medicare. But remember, this is the first year that we are eating into the reserves of Social Security. If we don't talk about Social Security, then it'll continue to go in a place that we don't want it to go. So we have to be adults about talking about Social Security and Medicare. Remember, if we don't protect Social Security for this generation, it will break down for the next generation or the next or the next. We don't want that. We want it to be secure for this generation so it'll move forward for the next generation.
Candidate Hill, you call yourself an experienced change maker.
Is it different questions? Yes. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
You call yourself an experienced change maker. What does that mean?
That means that I have worked on one of the toughest issues facing our society. I've grown an organization from a $5 million a year organization to a $50 million a year organization with 400 staff working across the state of California. I've developed and passed major legislation amounting to $1.2 billion in capital and $3.5 billion over 10 years in services.
Congressman Knight, you co-authored the No NATO Withdrawal Act in July. Explain why this is important and explain the fear you have of the White House withdrawing from the alliance.
Oh, I don't believe we should withdraw from NATO. I've visited many NATO countries. I've talked to leaders in NATO countries, whether it be military or political leaders. We have a very close-knit relationship with our NATO leaders. That is why we are in a safer world that we have NATO in place. I don't believe that withdrawing from NATO would ever be the right thing for the United States.
Candidate Hill, you won't accept money from corporate PACs. Why is that important to you?
I think that the reason we have so many problems with people not showing up to vote is because they don't believe that our political system is working for them. Because over and over again, we see politicians who are accountable to big corporations, as evidenced by the tax plan, and not to the people that they're supposed to serve. So I believe in trust as the most important quality in a politician, and I think that you have to walk the walk. You can't take corporate money if you say that you're going to stand up to corporations.
Congressman Knight, how has your background in the military and law enforcement influenced your decision-making as a congressman?
Well, I think I'm very mission-oriented. I think being a veteran and working in the United States Army makes you mission-oriented. That's the problem. That's where we're going, and that's what we've got to fix. As a police officer, it's 1 out of 12. You show up to see the woman, see the man, see what the problem is, and try and help fix the problem. Same thing in Congress. But you got to work with a lot of different people and make sure that they understand where you're coming from and understand where they're coming from.
Candidate Hill, you have the endorsements of the Democratic establishment. How will that influence your decisions if elected?
Well, on the bright side, I'm not dependent on the Democratic establishment for fundraising, which is why you're accountable to people. I know that my money is coming from individual donors. That allows me to be independent, and I think that's one of the reasons that you've seen me out fundraise Congressman Knight for the last 3 reporting periods, and the money that's coming in to fight for him, in to save his seat, is all coming from the Republican establishment. So you're gonna see that affect our votes. I can be an independent voice when it's gonna be much harder for him to be.
Congressman Knight, what is the accomplishment you are the proudest of during your current term?
During the current term, there's no doubt about it, it's the urgent care for our veterans. This was a process that was brought forward by a gentleman who's very respected in the community. Talked to me, we talked to the VA, and we've got this established to help our veterans. Now, when we talked about this process, we knew we would be butting heads with the VA. We also knew that we had to be diligent on working with the VA and making sure that they know we're not trying to privatize the VA, we're not trying to do anything like that. We're trying to get better care and more accessible care for our veterans. So without a doubt, that is going to help our veteran population like nowhere else in the country.
Thank you. Candidate Hill, you have stated that our tax system needs to be more equitable. What changes are needed to achieve that?
The first thing is that the benefits that we're giving need to go proportionately to people who need those tax cuts. We have this massive income inequality that we're facing as a country that leads to countless problems. And we need to, any kind of tax reform, the vast majority of the benefits need to go to the people who are struggling with poverty, who are in the middle class. The middle class pays the vast majority of, it takes the vast majority of the burden of taxes. And we have tax policy over and over again that doesn't benefit us.
Congressman Knight, what are congressional Republicans' plan if they maintain their majority in Congress?
We're going to try and continue this booming economy. There is Taxes 2.0 and Taxes 3.0 that are following, but we're trying to make sure that this economy continues to boom and that there are still opportunities out there for people that are going to work. One of the biggest problems right now is we have more jobs than we have people to fill these jobs. We've got to look at how we're going to fill those people into those jobs. Might be a 4-year university, might be an accreditation, might be a program that's working right here in the Antelope Valley. We've got to figure that out.
Candidate Hill, why should people vote for someone who has no experience in Congress?
I think we can all see that Congress isn't working. Do we really want people who have that kind of experience to continue to go back and do a bad job? I mean, I think that speaks for itself.
Nice.
Congressman Knight, what would you do if you retain your seat and the Democrats are in the majority?
I would do what I did when I was a legislator in California. My 2 years as a senator in California, I passed more pieces of legislation than any other Republican in the Senate. That means that I had co-authors on both sides of the aisle. That means I worked with my Democrat partners. That doesn't mean I went in there and I said, you know, I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat. We are not working together. We worked very closely. We got a lot of things done.
Candidate Hill, explain why the homeless has become such an important issue for you.
Homelessness, to me, is the culmination of so much of what's wrong with our society. You see how everything else ties into it, from income inequality to the criminal justice system to mental health and substance abuse to housing. And so working on that issue it has given me experience in all of those different factors. And so I think that it's also an issue that we're seeing more and more of in our community. But I don't think that it's the issue that I'm running on. It's the issue that I have experience with, and that I can translate that experience to all of the other things that work into it.
Congressman Knight, how is the new tax law, in your estimation, going to affect workers in the Antelope Valley?
Oh, we've seen it. We've seen it help workers in the Antelope Valley. I've had countless people come up to me and say, thank you for what went on with the tax bill. Remember, nothing is perfect, and people who are running for office who have never been in office always say they can do something perfect. This bill is a booming economy because of the tax problem that we had. Even in the last debate, my opponent said that this bill, yes, it does save people a couple $100. What is a couple $100? We heard from Leader Pelosi, it's just crumbs. Crumbs here in the Antelope Valley mean more gas tanks to get over the hill to their job. Thank you.
Candidate Hill,
I thought there were jobs here.
you have been accused of promoting ideas that will lead to an increase in taxes on gas. Is that true?
I don't know what ideas they're referring to, but I do know that I have, I think the fact that I'm being attacked on gas and on a state legislative issue shows you that there's not a whole lot to be attacking.
You can silently enjoy yourselves. Congressman Knight, how do you respond to the fact that Democrats have targeted you as a high-profile target for removal in this election?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, this is a very closely registered seat where Democrats and Republicans are very close. I think that you're seeing that in California because of policies in California might be different than policies at the federal level. So I think it's pretty easy to just look at the registration and say that's where we're going to go. Republicans are going to try and defend, or Democrats are going to try and take. That's all over the country, and this is just one of those seats.
Candidate Hill, do you support a Medicare for All program?
Look, I support getting health care for everyone, and I believe that that means moving towards a Medicare for All program. What that looks like is what we should talk about. I think that Medicare in and of itself has a number of challenges, but I think the first thing that we need to focus on is a healthcare system that works right now while laying the groundwork for something in the future that's sustainable and that actually helps people.
That ends this round, and now we go into the final statements, and I would like to say to the candidates, if any question was brought up or anything you felt you didn't get to answer fully, you can address that in your closing remarks. And first up is Congressman Knight.
Well, again, I want to thank the Chamber and the League of Women Voters for putting this forum on. I think they're very helpful. I do. I think that you're looking at two people who are running for the 25th Congressional District, and one has a lot of experience and one is brand new to this. And you're going to make up your mind on which is better. If you call a plumber to your house and they say, this is my very first day I'm doing plumbing, but I'm going to give it my best shot, I think that that's problematic. But let's just look at some of the words that have come out of the last couple debates. We've talked about the tax plan. We've talked about what it has done. I've said it's a booming economy. I said unemployment is under 4% for the last 4 months. In the last 49 years, it's only been under 4% 9 months. You've just lived over the last 4 months of almost half of that time. We have a very, very booming economy where wages are going up. On Friday, they said these are the highest wages since 2008. So let's look at words too. In the last debate, my opponent agreed. Well, that's only a couple $100 that families are getting. Right here in the Antelope Valley, we need jobs, and we've always talked about jobs. But 70,000 people go over the hill for work. A couple $100 makes a big difference. Now we know that it's more than that in the tax plan, but even if it is only a couple $100, that's 5, 6 tanks full of gas to get to work and to get back. I told you I would work on the aerospace community and to veterans. The groundbreaking veteran urgent care program that we have nowhere else in the country. This will be a pilot for everywhere in the country. What we have done for the aerospace community is unprecedented. We've worked directly with the companies to say, how can we help? What can we do? And then we work directly with the military. What is the best process, the best platform for you to be successful if we send you into combat? Again, I thank you very much for coming out tonight, and I appreciate your showing up.
Candidate Hill. Candidate Hill.
Sure. There are a couple things. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to the League of Women Voters, to the Chamber, to all of you for showing up, and as always to Congressman Knight. I also want to address a couple things that were mentioned. First of all, I believe Congressman Knight said that he supports Social Security when he's on the record for saying that Social Security is a bad idea. I think that's just a characteristic example of how he changes what he says based on his audience and based on what the political feeling is at that moment. I don't believe that we can trust somebody like that, and I think that we have to have somebody who actually has our backs and who's consistent. Someone who is truly accountable to the voters of this district, not to the special interests that fund his campaign, not to the special interests that fund the conservative interest groups that are. So I believe a couple of things. One is on the tax plan. The other thing is we have, he talks about the couple $100, $20 a month. $20 a month. I love having an extra $20 a month in my pocket. I've been poor, there's no doubt about that, and yeah, it helps. But when you compare that to the billions of dollars that are going to corporations and that are going to people, like the people, frankly, that I see in West LA who are kind enough to donate my campaign, those are the people who are getting the massive tax cuts, and I don't think that's fair. I don't think that that's equality. I think that we have to have someone who's fighting for the real people in this community. And when you talk about experience, let's talk about the real experience of truly helping people. Not going in, working in a cog in a machine, but trying to change the system. Because we know, y'all raised your hands, this system is broken. And we need people who are truly going to go in and try and fix it.